Let's dive into the Buffy reboot situation like we're dissecting a mystery on a podcast, because there's a lot more under the surface than just, it didn't work. I'm going to break down what happened, why it matters for reboots, and what this tells us about franchise storytelling in an era obsessed with nostalgia, pilots, and what audiences actually want to see on screen. First impression hook. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, a title that screams original spark and cultural impact, ends up barely using its own star. That paradox isn't just a nitpick from fans. It's a case study in how a revival can derail itself before it even finds its footing. Personally, I think the core mistake wasn't about the actor or the setting. It was about balancing mythology with fresh stakes, while managing expectations from a legacy audience who demands both recognition and surprise. Context drop-in. The project, reportedly titled Buffy the Vampire Slayer, New Sunnydale, had Sarah Michelle Gellar, the icon herself, returning to reprise Buffy. Yet Hulu ultimately passed on moving forward. The shooting draft leaked details that Buffy only appears at the end of the pilot, with a single line. That kind of minimal presence is a red flag for a flagship character, especially when the show's name is in the title. What this really signals is a disconnect between what fans expect from a Buffy reboot and what the writers chose to foreground in the pilot. Let's unpack the main threads, one by one, with fresh eyes and some opinionated takes. 1. The pilot's structural gamble, making Buffy a late-game reveal. Core idea. The pilot spends most of its runtime with a new hero in Sunnydale, Nova, before flipping to NYC where a woman in a pantsuit named In Summers appears. Buffy shows up only at the end, and with one line. Commentary and interpretation. From my perspective, that's a bold but risky move. Buffy isn't just a character, she's a brand and a signal. If you bury her, you forget that the audience is showing up for a Buffy-led experience, not a hidden cameo scavenger hunt. The move risks eroding the very premise that hooks longtime fans. A world that Buffy defined. What makes this really interesting is how it reflects a larger trend in reboots trying to write around legacy characters to appeal to new viewers, yet often forgetting how to honor the original draw. It also raises a deeper question. Should a legacy property reboot lean into nostalgia or aggressively reframe what made it iconic? If you take a step back and think about it, the pilot's choice to foreground a new hero suggests a desire to modernize or diversify, but without a clear bridge to Buffy's core ethos. You end up with a disjointed tonal signal that confuses rather than clarifies the mission. Wider takeaway. The Buffy name is a double-edged sword online. It creates instant recognition but also intense scrutiny. A strong, upfront Buffy presence would have signaled to fans, we know what you want, but we're expanding the universe on your terms. Instead, the limited role communicates hesitation about leaning into the very thing that defines the IP. 2. The learning tool pilot argument versus momentum. Core idea. Gellar emphasizes pilots are learning tools, not finished products, and compares them to Batgirl's completed but unreleased project. The implication. The pilot is deliberately unfinished to test characters and world building before committing to a full season. Commentary and interpretation. I'd argue that's a reasonable process in theory, but in practice it created a chilling effect. If the pilot is clearly a prototype, there's less goodwill when expectations are already high. From my point of view, a prototype should carry enough connective tissue to keep the audience engaged enough to want the next episode. Buffy's essence. Sharp quips, supernatural intrigue, the moral gray areas of growing up with responsibility, needs to be felt from the jump. A pilot that feels like experimental scaffolding can make viewers wonder, what exactly are we building here, and who is this for? What many people don't realize is that modern streaming audiences equate pilot quality with potential longevity. If the bar is perceived as low, bailing early becomes too easy for streaming executives. Bigger trend. The industry increasingly treats pilots as proof-of-concept tests, rather than final entries. While this can lower risk, it also invites early skepticism from fans who want to feel a complete, confident product from day one. 3. The star's absence as a storytelling signal. Core idea. Sarah Michelle Gellar's stated preference that the leaked pilot not be watched signals tension between fan curiosity and the creator's need to protect a vision that hasn't fully landed. Commentary and interpretation. Buffy's absence isn't just about screen time. It's about authority and narrative weight. Buffy is the mythic center of the Slayer saga. Removing that center makes the rest of the orbit feel directionless. In my opinion, a Buffy reboot without a strong Buffy throughline risks losing the energy that sparked the original series' devotion. The fact that the pilot was circulating as a leak shows a fascinating tension. Fans crave the behind-the-scenes look, yet the creators want to control the storytelling canon. It's a conflict between transparency to build trust and secrecy to preserve a narrative arc's surprises. A detail I find fascinating is how the show's identity hinges on Buffy's presence as a moral and cultural anchor, not just a superhero kick. What this implies: if you're rebooting a beloved character, you either lean into the charisma and history that made the character iconic, or you risk creating a derivative product that lacks soul. The middle ground, barely featuring the central name in the title, can backfire by fragmenting expectations. For the broader reboot landscape and timing. Core idea. The Buffy reboot sits at the intersection of nostalgia fatigue and the urge for fresh, diverse storytelling. The leaked draft and Hulu's decision reflect a broader pattern where studios test the waters with pilots, but hesitate to commit when the signal isn't clear or strong enough. Commentary and interpretation. From my perspective, this is less about Buffy specifically and more about how modern franchises handle cadence. Audiences are savvier. They're not just checking the face of a character but the texture of the world, the stakes, and the voice. If the pilot doesn't establish a tone that feels both respectful to the original and exciting on its own terms, the risk is losing both old fans and new ones. A deeper takeaway is that successful revivals often combine a reverent nod to the past with a bold, discoverable path forward. Buffy's reboot, in its current reporting, seems to have struggled to articulate that delicate balance. Bigger trend. The industry is increasingly cautious with IPs that carry strong emotional attachments. That caution can paralyze ambition, leading to safer, less distinctive versions of what fans loved. If we're honest, the best reboots either redefine the universe or offer a high-quality extension that feels inevitable once you see it. Deeper insight. What this all reveals about storytelling discipline. The core idea across these threads is how a single decision, the placement of Buffy in the pilot, reverberates through audience perception, franchise health, and creative trust. Commentary. Personally, I think the most telling takeaway is how important import and tempo are in revival storytelling. The audience isn't just passive, they're evaluating your choices in real time. Who gets foreground when the familiar voice returns, how new characters are integrated, and whether the original spirit remains intact. If you misread the tempo, you risk alienating loyal fans while offering little to newcomers. What this really suggests is that successful reboots need a clear promise. Either we'll honor the legend while evolving the story, or we're starting fresh with a modern lens and inviting you to grow with us. The misalignment here created skepticism about whether the project could deliver on either promise. Final thought. The Buffy situation is a microcosm of a larger cultural pattern. How we negotiate legacy, adaptation, and innovation in a media ecosystem that rewards both reverence and reinvention. The question it leaves us with is, what is the right balance between homage and audacious reinvention when the property is as culturally loaded as Buffy? Closing thought. If this reboot had moved forward with a Buffy that feels earned from the start, clear through lines, sharp dialogue, and a genuine sense that the core myth is being reinterpreted with care, could it have found its own voice without stepping on the original's toes? Maybe, but the current narrative suggests a chilling lesson. Name recognition is not enough. You need a strong, self-contained reason for the audience to invest, right from episode 1. What do you think would have been the most convincing path for a Buffy reboot to honor the legacy while offering something thrillingly new? Share your thoughts below, and let's unpack whether the clock can still be reset for Sunnydale in a way that respects both the past and the future.